From the moment I saw him grab the microphone, his knuckles bone white against the black steel, I knew my wedding was about to become the stage for a reckoning years in the making. He believed he was about to deliver the final, crushing blow to my happiness. He had no idea he was merely the star of a tragedy I had scripted just for him. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? Ah yes, my wedding day. To the outside world, it was the absolute pinnacle of a fairy tale. The venue, a stately manor whose ivy-draped walls seemed to whisper secrets as old as the stone itself, sat under a sky so perfectly blue it looked painted on. The air was heavy with the scent of 1,000 white roses, the exact kind I told everyone I'd dreamed of since childhood, one more small, but crucial, prop in my elaborate play. At the end of the aisle stood Mark, the love of my life, his eyes shining with a devotion so pure it was the one anchor in the storm I was about to unleash. He was the only honest thing in the entire beautiful, treacherous day. I felt like I was floating, not on a cloud of happiness, but on the sharp, electric current of anticipation, the chilling thrill a hunter feels as the prey steps ever closer to the snare. My mother, Sarah, was a whirlwind of cloying perfume and rustling lace, fluttering around me, adjusting my veil with a painfully stretched smile, her face a perfect mask of manufactured maternal pride. And beside her, beaming like a king surveying his domain, was my stepfather, Steve, the man who had walked into my life when I was 5, a supposed knight in shining armor who arrived just after my biological father, so the story went, had simply vanished into thin air. Steve, who taught me to ride a bike, his patience a balm on my scraped knees. Steve, who patiently unraveled the mysteries of algebra at our kitchen table on countless Tuesday nights, his brow furrowed in concentration. I remember one afternoon so clearly, I must have been 10, and I'd come home from school in tears because some girls had made fun of my secondhand shoes. Steve didn't just hug me. He sat me down on the worn floral couch, wiped my tears with his callous thumb, and told me a story about a little bird with a crooked wing. This bird couldn't fly as high as the others, but it learned to fly smarter, navigating tight spaces in the forest and finding the sweetest berries the high-fliers missed. Being different isn't a weakness, Amelia, he had said, his voice a warm, comforting rumble. It's your superpower. That was Steve, the hero of my childhood. Steve, the man I called Dad with a fierce, possessive love. He was my father in every way that mattered, which is why his betrayal, when I finally uncovered it, felt like a surgeon's scalpel methodically twisting in an old wound, turning it septic with a cold, calculated rage. When Mark and I announced our engagement, Steve delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. He and my mother sat us down in their perfectly appointed living room, a room I now knew was built on a foundation of stolen money, and he offered to pay for a huge portion of the wedding. "You're my daughter," he proclaimed, his voice catching with carefully crafted emotion, his eyes welling up with crocodile tears as he held my hands. "I want you to have the wedding of your dreams, no expense spared." Mark and I, playing our parts to perfection, feigned overwhelming gratitude. We let him believe his offer was the only thing making our dream wedding possible, watching him swell with pride. He dove headfirst into the role of father of the bride, insisting on being part of every decision. He tasted cakes, his booming laugh echoing through bakeries as he declared one, not rich enough for his little girl. He toured a dozen venues, dismissing some as not grand enough. He insisted on the most expensive champagne, the biggest floral arrangements, the string quartet instead of the DJ, always punctuating his demands with his favorite line, "Nothing's too good for my little girl." But as I smiled and nodded, I was no longer just the happy bride-to-be. I was a director, watching my actors hit their marks, taking note of every cue. Looking back, it's not that I was blind to the coming storm. I was the one who had meticulously seeded the clouds. For 2 full years, I had known the truth. Its discovery wasn't a single, cinematic lightning strike. It was a slow, creeping rot that started with a single piece of mail. A letter from a law firm, addressed to my mother, that I'd mistakenly picked up from the doormat. Her name was on it, but so was another, Richard, my biological father. When I asked her about it, my voice a study in casual curiosity, she snatched it from my hand, hers trembling slightly as she dismissed it as more legal junk. But it was a loose thread in a perfectly woven tapestry of lies, and my fingers couldn't help but pull. The real digging began in the dead of night. Shrouded in the absolute quiet of the house, I became a ghost, haunting the spaces of my own childhood. I wasn't looking for a birth certificate. I was hunting for the phantom of a man they had methodically erased. It took weeks. I started in the attic, sifting through boxes of old holiday decorations, the smell of dust and time filling my lungs. Nothing. Then I moved to the basement, my flashlight beam cutting through the damp gloom. Nothing. The suspicion festered, becoming a low, constant fever. Finally, I remembered Steve's obsession with warranties. In the back of his home office, in a dusty metal filing cabinet labeled Household Warranties, a place so mundane no one would ever look, I found it. It wasn't even hidden, just buried under a folder for a 20-year-old dishwasher. A shoebox, and inside bank statements. Not theirs. They were from a trust account I never knew existed, an account in my name. The deposits were like clockwork, every single month, for 20 years. They were from Richard. There it was in black and white, child support, thousands upon thousands of dollars. Then after I turned 18, the deposits got bigger, explicitly labeled college fund. A deposit landed the very week my mother told me, in tears, that they were taking out a second mortgage to pay for my first year of college. And then, bigger still, with memos that made my breath catch in my throat. Wedding fund. The total at the bottom of the last page was staggering, a number so large it seemed to vibrate on the page, a monument to a life I was never allowed to have. Enough to cover my entire Ivy League education, which they claimed had put them into crippling debt. My mother had spun me a fairy tale about a deadbeat dad, a man who ran off and never sent a single cent. I grew up on the myth of Steve the Savior. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow, right there on the dusty office floor. They hadn't just lied, they had committed a theft so profound, so long-running, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. They stole my father's money, but they also stole his character, his name, and my entire life with him. The grief that night was a physical weight, a stone in my chest that crushed the air from my lungs. But as the sun began to rise, that grief didn't dissipate. It crystallized. It hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. Over the next 2 years, I built my case in secret. I found a private investigator in a dimly lit coffee shop 2 towns over, paying him in cash. He found Richard in less than 2 weeks, living a quiet life 3 states away as a landscape architect. The first time I called him, my hands were shaking so badly I had to dial the number 3 times. His voice on the other end was hesitant, then it cracked, so thick with a rush of emotion he could barely form words. He thought I hated him. My mother had told him I wanted nothing to do with him, that seeing him would only confuse and upset me. She told him Steve was a wonderful father and that he should stay away for my sake. And he did. He respected what he believed were my wishes, but he never stopped providing for me, hoping one day the money would reach me as a tangible sign of his love. It was on that phone call, hearing the raw, 20-year-old pain in his voice mirroring my own, that the plan began to form. It was cold, it was methodical, and it required me to become a master of deception. I told Richard everything, and together, through countless whispered phone calls and encrypted emails, we designed this day. We didn't just plan a reunion, we engineered a demolition. The ceremony was an agonizing blur of white tulle and forced smiles. Saying my vows to Mark was the only real, true moment in a day built from deceit. The pure, unwavering love in his eyes was my anchor. He knew everything. He was my co-conspirator. When I had broken down and told him the truth, his quiet, simmering fury on my behalf was a terrifying and beautiful thing to witness. He was the one who kept me focused, reminding me that this was about justice, not just revenge. As we moved to the reception, a magnificent ballroom dripping with crystals and flowers that Steve had so proudly insisted upon, the atmosphere was electric with feigned joy. The champagne flowed, the guests laughed, and a brief, sharp pang of guilt shot through me as I looked out at their innocent, happy faces. But then my eyes would find Steve, holding court at the head table, basking in the golden glow of his perceived generosity, and the guilt would evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't cruelty. It was justice. Then the speeches began. My maid of honor gave a beautiful, tearful toast. Mark's best man shared hilarious stories. And then it was Steve's turn. My heart wasn't pounding with bridal nerves. It was hammering with the heavy, rhythmic tick of a clock counting down to 0. He swaggered to the microphone, his steps a little too deliberate, a sure sign he'd had too much of the expensive champagne he'd ordered, just as we had predicted. "Is this thing on?" he slurred, and a few guests chuckled uncomfortably. I arranged my face into a mask of fond exasperation. He started with the expected script, but I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching the blotchy, angry flush climb his neck. The switch flipped right on cue. His tone turned sharp, acidic. "I've done a lot for this girl," he said, his voice rising with an ugly, whining edge. "Paid for her school, paid for her car, put a roof over her head for 20 years. A confused, heavy silence began to spread through the hall like a stain. I risked a glance at my mother. Every drop of color had drained from her face. Her smile was frozen, a rictus of sheer horror. She knew. Under the table, Mark's hand found mine and squeezed, a silent signal. "It's happening. Stay strong." "I did all that," Steve continued, his voice getting louder, his gaze locking on me with a chilling, predatory intensity. "And I was going to pay for this whole ridiculously fancy wedding. But you know what? A man has his limits." My heart grew strangely calm. This was the precipice. I had to hold my expression, to look like the devastated, humiliated daughter he believed he was ambushing. I had to let him have his full monologue. "So I've decided," he boomed, his voice distorted and monstrous through the speakers, "that I'm not paying a single cent. Not one dime. I am officially withdrawing my offer. You want to be a grown-up and get married? Fine. Pay for it your damn self." A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. My face was burning, but not from humiliation. It was the heat of a perfectly contained fury. I let the tears well in my eyes, blurring the faces of our 200 guests. My mother was on her feet, whispering frantically, trying to pull his arm, but he shrugged her off. I let a single, perfect tear trace a path through my makeup. I needed to look broken. I needed him to feel the absolute peak of his victory. Inside, I was counting down. 3, 2, 1. And right on cue, as the agonizing silence stretched, a loud, definitive creak echoed from the back of the hall. The heavy oak doors swung open. A man was silhouetted in the doorway. He was older, with kind, weary eyes and salt and pepper hair, wearing a simple, well-pressed suit. For a split second, a wave of real, unscripted emotion washed over me. It was him, a face I'd only seen in the faded photographs he'd sent me. My father, Richard. The whispers died instantly. He walked forward with a quiet confidence that commanded the room's attention, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. He walked past the stunned guests, past my mother whose face had turned into a waxy, horrified mask, and came to a stop directly in front of a now confused Steve. Without a word, Richard took the microphone from Steve's limp hand. He didn't even glance at him. His eyes were locked on me. "I believe," Richard said, his voice calm but infused with a power that made Steve physically shrink, "there has been a misunderstanding." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of his pen scratching firmly across the paper was the only sound in the cavernous hall, more deafening than all of Steve's yelling. He tore the check out, folded it neatly, and walked over to our wedding planner. "This should cover everything, with a generous tip for your trouble," he told her. Then he turned, his attention finally falling on Steve, and the entire room felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. "And now, I believe it's my turn for a speech." Richard stood at the microphone, not as a savior, but as an executioner. "My name is Richard, and I am Amelia's father," he began. A new wave of murmurs rose. Her real father. He looked directly at Steve, who was now sputtering. "For 20 years I stayed away because I was told it was what was best for my daughter. And for 20 years I sent money. A lot of money." His gaze moved, slowly and deliberately, to my mother. "Isn't that right, Sarah? I sent child support every single month. Then when Amelia turned 18, I started sending her college fund directly to you. And a few years after that, I started a wedding fund. A fund that, by my calculations, should have more than enough to cover this beautiful day 3 times over. The truth, spoken aloud, was intoxicating. I had grown up believing I was a burden. Now everyone knew the hero was a fraud, and the villain they'd imagined was the one who had silently provided for me. Richard's voice was steady and unforgiving. "You," he said, pointing a finger at Steve, "told me you would give Amelia the wedding of her dreams using my money. Instead, you've been cashing my checks and using my daughter as a prop to make yourself look like a saint. You didn't pay for her college. I did. You didn't pay for her car. I did. And you sure as hell weren't paying for this wedding. I was." The feigned betrayal on my face was replaced by the raw, unvarnished truth spreading across the faces of our guests. Steve was a common thief. He and my mother had built their life on lies, bankrolled by the man they taught me to resent. "I stayed away because her mother," Richard said, his voice finally cracking with 2 decades of pain, "told me it would be too confusing for you. I see now that trusting them was the biggest mistake of my life. I should never have listened. I should have been here." The room was dead silent. Steve looked like a cornered animal. My mother was openly weeping, but they were the selfish, ugly tears of someone whose deceitful world had just been publicly detonated. And here's the part of the story I haven't told anyone until now. This wasn't a rescue. It was an extraction. As Richard walked toward me, he was playing the final card in our shared game. "Amelia," he said gently, "I am so sorry. But I'm here now, and I would be honored if you'd allow me to have the father-daughter dance." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they were tears of triumph, of a terrible, righteous victory. I nodded. The word yes caught in my throat. I had orchestrated every detail, from baiting Steve about the wedding's mounting expenses for months to accidentally letting him see the extravagant bills. I had stoked his narcissism and his resentment, knowing his alcoholism and fragile ego would do the rest. It was me who told Richard the exact timing of his entrance. Steve's public humiliation wasn't a byproduct of the day, it was the entire point. He didn't just ruin my wedding, I sacrificed my wedding to ruin him. Steve tried to storm out, a coward to the end, but my uncles, men who had looked up to him for years, quietly rose and blocked his path. Their faces were grim, their message clear: "You will stay, and you will answer for this." The party was over. The band began packing up in a surreal, somber silence. About half the guests quietly slipped out, but the other half, our real family, stayed. And Richard stayed. He sat with Mark and me for hours as the staff cleared away the wreckage. He showed me the pictures he carried in his wallet, their edges worn from 2 decades of being looked at every day. A baby picture of me with a smear of chocolate on my cheek. A first-grade school picture he'd somehow gotten a copy of. My entire life lived in his pocket. It's been a year. I haven't spoken a word to Steve or my mother since. The legal fallout was quiet but decisive. Faced with undeniable evidence of fraud, their lawyer advised them to settle. Steve had to sell their house, the house built with my father's money, to pay Richard back every stolen cent with interest. My mother leaves desperate, pleading voicemails. I don't listen. I just press delete. The cost was high. I lost a mother. I lost my entire childhood story. Those memories, like Steve telling me about the bird with the crooked wing, are now tainted, twisted into the tools of a master manipulator. But from that catastrophe, I gained something undeniably real. I have a father. Richard and I are building something new from the ruins. It's not perfect, but it's honest. Last week, he taught me how to change the oil in my car, his knuckles covered in grease, his laugh easy and genuine as I fumbled with the wrench. He is kind, he is funny, and when he looks at me, I see a love that asks for nothing in return. On that day, I orchestrated the end of the man I thought was my father, but in doing so, I finally got my real one back. My wedding was a disaster, but it was also the beginning of my real life. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe, you won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.